Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 32. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has liked, shared, and commented and continues to rate the show. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. I also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength, for bringing you this episode today for free. Cerberus is an organization that puts the athlete first and actively works towards providing the best quality gear at an affordable price. Owned and operated by active lifters, Cerberus has quickly evolved into a global brand symbolizing quality and trust. Their ever-growing product range is used by the top athletes and at the highest level of competition. And every Cerberus strength product has been designed with performance in mind with the highest attention to detail. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use promo code STRENGTH_game to save an extra 10% off your next order. And in this week's episode, I'm joined by Antonio Squillante. Squillante is a PhD student at the University of Southern California in the Department of Biokinesiology and Physical Therapy. Working in the Clinical Exercise Research Center at USC, his extended research focuses on weightlifting and eccentric training. In addition, Squillante is a faculty member at Setanta College, teaching courses in the Master of Science program in performance coaching. He's also a published author for Ultimate Athlete Concepts with his book, Power, The Training of Champions, and has written multiple articles for EliteFTS, Elite Track, and Breaking Muscle. Antonio continues to stay heavily involved in the academic side of strength conditioning, leading discussions with the growing NSCA Weightlifting SIG as their current chair, as well as teaching many CSCS prep courses in Southern California. In addition to his academic work, Squillante is a coach who has experience with high school and collegiate athletes in both the U.S. and Canada. And in 2016, Squillante had the privilege of coaching at the USA Track and Field Olympic Trials in Eugene, Oregon. He has also not only coached multiple athletes in both powerlifting and weightlifting, but he's also a competitive athlete in his own right. A former high school shot putter, he took a run at going professional in American football playing in Italy before moving to the States. Currently, he competes in powerlifting at the state and national level. Like I said, I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get into the game with Antonio Squillante. What's going on, everybody? I am excited today. I'm joined by a man that wears many different hats, including his USC one right now. And being in the state of California, I can't like anybody, but at least we're in different conferences.
Yes.
Antonio Squillante, how's it going, man?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
Good. It's great to have you on, man. Like I said, you've got a ton of things going on. You're a PhD student at the moment, doing a lot of research. Luckily, the semester's winding down right now. You're a coach, power lifter, but I want to get right into it and kind of start from the very beginning. How did you actually get involved in the strength game? And then up to this point, like what sports did you play leading into a powerlifting career at the moment?
That's a great question. So I started my athletic career, so to speak, in high school, like I think many people in our field. I was a thrower, so I did shot put and discus throwing in high school. And to be fair honest, I did that mostly because I've always been a heavier kid than the average. And when you're in that situation, they usually point you toward like strength-oriented kind of sports. I was never very athletic. I couldn't really run much, so that was my only option. But then growing up through college, I decided to play something different. And in Italy, rugby is huge. Like if you're in that kind of field, like strength training, so to speak, like bigger guys. But I didn't really like rugby that much until a friend of mine that was on the team that I was trying for said, like, why don't you try American football? It's similar, but the game is different enough that maybe you like it. So I did. And that was actually a very good match because I loved American football. I played through college in Division One and actually made to play professional for 3 years afterward in the Italian Football League. I was a linebacker and a defensive end, so I had a great time. And I think at that point is where I really got into more like legit strength training. So I've always been like in and out of the gym since high school, but never fully committed to it. But with football, I started to appreciate the importance of strength training, mostly because I saw the improvement in performance. Like once you lift more and you do all you're supposed to do, your performance on the field gets inevitably better. The only thing is that I started within a culture that is not very much the same culture that we have here in the States. So here we understand athletic development in a weight room in a much better, more complete, more rational manner. In Italy back then, it was mostly an hybrid between powerlifting and hardcore bodybuilding kind of approach. So I went from like starting college, I was 220 pounds, and I got drafted for the EFL. I was 325 pounds. So lots of bulking up, lots of like heavy lifting with no rhyme or reason, just move weight, get bigger, get stronger. That's all you need to do. And when I started like studying, because I started studying biology and then I shifted over to kinesiology, I understood that probably most of what I was doing wasn't technically right. And it didn't sound right. And then I like got more into the like scientific side of things. And I started doing my own research, my own reading. I started tweaking my training myself. I wasn't following the program the coaches were giving. I started doing my own programming based on what I was learning. And that's kind of what helped me transitioning out of the athletic career, so to speak, into more of the coaching, researching, lifting career that I have now. Like now I do compete in powerlifting. I still do shot putting on the side. I'm training for a weightlifting competition. Last year, I actually picked up triathlon, which is something completely new for me. So I'm experimenting with my own body based on what I've learned through my academic career and what I've learned through my athletic career as well. But strength training is definitely my number one priority. Like at my core, if I have to consider myself something athletically speaking, that would be a power lifter probably.
There you go. Yeah, that's crazy to hear all the different things that you're doing, and definitely don't want to pigeonhole you to one of those. But it's cool to see that your athletic background, what you're kind of interested in with your research and academic side, they kind of funnel into each other.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just as you're interested in certain research, like for your PhD and everything, it kind of influences how you're training at the current moment, and one fuels the other. Yeah, it's always interesting also to like hear from different countries and how kind of they approach strength training and sports performance and everything. And some countries seem to be ahead, like Australia and New Zealand are always kind of on the forefront of like technology and everything. And then obviously different sports and different kind of systems play a role into how people train as well. But that's kind of cool to see from you coming back over to the States and then going from athletics now to coaching, still coaching on the side, but really heavily in the academic and like prep side of everything. That's also like awesome to see how those two balance each other out. What was kind of your intro to coaching? Like after your like professional career, like in the Italian Football League, what was kind of your introduction into coaching? I know you've worked with powerlifting athletes and you work with some weightlifters as well now, but you did work with some teams and some track athletes too. What kind of was your intro to that? And then what kind of led you to switch gears and really get involved in academic side?
So my very first job as a coach was with the Italian national team for rugby, the female team. So I was the strength coach for about 3 years throughout different tournaments. That was like fresh out of undergrad school. So that was my first. Italy doesn't have the same system that we have here where you do sports in school. If you want to work, you have to work with either professional levels like soccer, rugby, or why not, or you have to work at like amateur level, and that's where there's no money. So no one wants to do that. So if you want to make a career, you try to work. I was never big into soccer, which is very unusual for an Italian. Like I do follow soccer. I enjoy watching the game, but I was never into coaching it because of my interest in I've always looked at the field of sports science more under the perspective of like strength training kind of applications. And of course, rugby and track and field, especially throwing events, are the one where you can express your interest in strength training at the best of your ability. So I chose to work with rugby first, and I had a blast. What was really driving me to improve in my profession was I wanted to work for American football because I was a football player myself. So yes, I could relate very well with rugby players, but it wasn't the same thing. And that's how I decided there's no such a thing as a professional strength coach for football in Italy. And that's why I started looking for positions in the States. And I started from a very teeny tiny college in Massachusetts, Anna Maria College, a D3 program where I was the head coach for football. And since then, I just followed the regular path that like we all did in strength and conditioning. So primarily with football, all the way from Division 3 to Division 1 in Canada too, at Bishop University. That's where I started working with some other sports too, some Olympic sports, some basketball. But on the side, I was always doing, okay, I coach football. I'm a strength coach for football, but my interest is in powerlifting and weightlifting and track. So I was following some like older adult athletes in track and field as well. That's how I ended up coaching at the Olympic trial in 2016 in Oregon, mostly throwers, javelin, shot put, and discus. And honestly, that was probably the one experience that motivated me to go back to school, because by then I already had a master, but I thought like I wasn't, I got to the Olympic trials and there people like Dan Path or like other like high level coaches. And I realized I'm not at their level yet. I don't speak their language quite yet. I need to improve my knowledge better. And that drew me more to like going back into academics and just enjoying the teaching aspect of it, enjoying the research aspect of it. And that's how I decided to like fully transition out of the coaching field into the research. But I still have like plenty of athletes that I train or program for, which are competing in powerlifting, are competing in weightlifting. Um, I still work with a few throwers in Europe. It's still a lot of fun for me.
That's cool. Do you, I guess, I don't know if you've given it much thought, but looking back, or now actually within your academic career, do you kind of think that after maybe your PhD, you'll start looking to kind of join coaching ranks again, just to like kind of get back to like Dan Papp's level and all those other coaches you saw at the trials? Because that was kind of your rationale to get out of coaching, to kind of like build your education again, like research things so that you can kind of speak to the athletes a little bit more professionally, or be on the same level of those guys. Is that something you're looking to do, or is kind of your research? I know you're an author now, teaching, working with the NSCA SIGs and everything, or like, are you kind of just enveloped with this like academic side and almost coaching coaches?
That's I'm a strength coach at my core, so I will never be able to split part with this profession. Um, I would love to go back into coaching. I don't quite know to what capacity yet. Like I really am passionate about research, and I absolutely love the teaching aspect of it even more than just sheer research. So if I have to pick one end goal for my career now, would be teaching. But I still want to be able, like, if I don't step foot in a weight room once a day, I don't feel good about myself. So I need to be somewhat involved in the coaching aspect of it. Now, whether that's going to be at a collegiate level with a full-on team, or in a private sector for like more like selected individuals, I'm not sure yet. But I will definitely at some point I would want to go back into coaching more hours a week for sure.
Yeah, I would feel the same way too. Kind of having such a deep background in being involved in athletics and training yourself, it definitely doesn't feel great to kind of be in the lab all the time.
No.
So to step back in and kind of see, like you said, the application of what you're doing, and see how your research is actually being applied to the athletes, so you're not kind of completely disconnected with them. I think that's awesome. And that's kind of one of the big topics I really wanted to kind of get onto next, which was like the art and science of strength conditioning And so you do have a very extensive experience on both sides of like those profession. How would you say like practitioners and professors can go about working together with like strength conditioning professionals and coaches? Like, where do you think there's maybe a disconnect between the two? And how do you think we can kind of bridge the gap between research that's actually being applied for coaches and how coaches can better interact with maybe professors and researchers to get the results that we definitely need to kind of help our athletes both?
Absolutely. So see, probably one of the main reasons why I enjoy teaching so much is because I think what I'm trying to do is use my own experience as a coach and every single mistake I've done in my career. We all done mistakes. We constantly do them when we put ourselves out there and try to coach, but try to reason through them with the knowledge I gain in academics to find a way so that I can prevent other coaches from doing the same mistakes. Because if I'd known back then why doing certain things or why not to do certain things, I wouldn't have done those mistakes. So it comes down to a good balance between having a solid background in, so to speak, science, but also have the practical knowledge of the know-how on how to do things. And I think, at least in our profession, and I'm referring to practitioners that work in the field of strength and conditioning more than sports science, the applied field where we like go to the weight room, we program, we lift with people, we bring them on the field, we have them doing sprints, whatever, where we are the one that like mediate between science and practice. I think we should all strive to have a system where we can learn by studying our best athletes and we can apply our knowledge to our best athletes, which I think it's a missing link in the majority of big research-based institutions. We're like, yeah, you do grade level science, you do awesome research, you have amazing technologies in the labs, but then when it comes to actually running a study, you can't have access to your athletic program and you can't test your athletes. There's no communication between the two departments, which is part of the system that we work with, and it's okay the way it is. But if we look at people who made the history of our science, of our field, like I'm thinking about like Zachowski, I'm thinking about Verchosansky, Akinen, Comey, Bosco, like people that actually did applied research in strength and conditioning. Those were scientists working with national teams. So those were scientists testing and applying with the best athletes in their country. And that's what I think got so much quality to the research that still nowadays, 30, 40, 50 years later, we still look back at their papers more than what we do to like more modern papers, mostly because there's going to be a difference in the way when you administer the same task to a professional athlete or a recreationally trained individual, your results are going to be different. And they're going to be different because you're working with different animals. So your science is solid and is good, but what you're learning from your trials is going to be affected by the breed that you're working with. If you're working with national level athletes, if you're working with competitive athletes, you're going to gain access to a level of knowledge and understanding of your intervention that is not even close to be comparable to anything else you can experience with any other just regularly fit individual. Like I just noticed that like we're running now a test on stadium plyometrics. So we're comparing drop jumping and depth jumping from different heights. And we collected a bunch of former athletes, which are not currently involved in sports, but they come from different backgrounds. And you just see the way a jumper or a sprinter's approaches a depth jump is completely different than a rugby player or a football player, because they're trained with more plyometrics. They're used to do plyometrics, and therefore you can push those boundaries a little bit more and get data that you wouldn't be otherwise capable of getting from anyone.
No, that's a great point. I mean, I think that is one of the primary reasons a lot of times maybe strength conditioning coaches or sports performance professionals oftentimes don't like looking at research. One, because maybe they don't know what to find, or oftentimes research is honestly a few years behind just because the time it takes to get it published, all the kind of hoops you have to jump through to get research validated financially, all those things. But it comes down to context. and the type of people that you're actually using, what your subjects actually consist of. And that's a great point. It's why we use all those old like Eastern European research articles and everything, and all those books that come from like the shock method and super training and everything. It's they were using top level athletes, and everybody wants to mimic that. No one wants to mimic what is coming from general population.
Yeah.
That's for something else. We're looking for the top level athletes at the height of their professional careers. What is actually working for them, and how can we mimic that to actually see application happen?
Like, I'm a huge motorsport fan. And like, if you think about technologies in mechanics, like if you want to develop a system to increase whatever, like grip of a car, you're going to test it on a car that goes 200 miles per hour. You're going to test it in NASCAR, IndyCar, F1. You're not going to test it on a vehicle that you drive every day, because you're never going to push that vehicle to the same level, and it's not built to push at that level. Same thing with athletes. If you want to study peak power output in weightlifting movements, like we did that study, we went and test competitive weightlifters. You wouldn't do that on people that just recreationally lift maybe twice a week, because you can't push them as much. It has to be done with athletes that can tolerate your intervention, and they can give you a response that is the one that you expect to see, because they're trained to do that. Otherwise, confounding variables and everything is not going to get you the same results.
Exactly. I love that. That's a great point. And it's funny, even though you're from Italy, maybe not a big soccer fan, but you do fit the stereotype. You love race cars. So
I'm diehard fan Ferrari. So like, you talk about motorsport, I can go on for days.
That's awesome. Hey, so you've been involved with the NSCA SIG, like the weightlifting SIG, for 6 years.
Yep.
You're in your 3rd year as the chair. I know the NSCA is doing a lot of things like with the special entrance groups, and just with the whole association in general, to kind of bridge the gap between research, application, all the science, and actual coaching. So how are groups like this kind of helping to work the relationship, and like in your position, like as a SIG chair, what kind of are you doing to facilitate and drive like the relationship between these two?
Yeah. So the way I look at it, of course, there are different perspectives on the matter, depending on what your ultimate goal is. But my goal as the chair of the weightlifting SIG is to let's rewind for a second. When I started as a professional strength and conditioning coach, I was extremely into learning more about weightlifting, like the actual weightlifting movements, to be able to use that with my athletes. I went through the formal education path. So like USA Weightlifting Level 1, USA Weightlifting Level 2, all other courses and internship that you can possibly do to learn more. But I never was a weightlifting coach to begin with. So my understanding was always limited by my lack of experience. I was not a professional in weightlifting. I'm still not. But there are out there people that have used weightlifting to build their own entire career as a coach. And talking about like high level, national level coaches such as Coach Takano, Coach Todden, Coach McKenna, Coach Polachonsky, who was on the show too, like people that have done that for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They might not have done that in a collegiate setting because they were working with competitive weightlifters, but they really explored the field of weightlifting at its very most, like in the deepest possible ways, by programming, by reading, by researching, and so on and so forth. So my goal was like, if I had to put myself in my own shoes 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I would have loved to have a platform that you can call our Facebook page, a website, whatever, where as a newbie, I could come in and bring in what I've learned through formal education, so school and private courses, but then filter that knowledge through the lenses of experienced coaches. And that's what we're trying to do with the chair. We're trying with the weightlifting SIG. We're trying to bring in people with a lot of experience, people, which is not myself, far from it, but people like Coach Todden or Dr. Comfort, which has done a lot of research applied to weightlifting, or Mike Stone, like people with a lot of experience either in coaching or in researching applied to weightlifting, so that they can help shaping the path for the newbies to find their own way and learn more from these people with more experience. So it's kind of it's more like giving back to the new generations more than developing elite coaches. Like, that I know that, like, there's no better way to develop yourself as a coach than just being the profession and being a coach. But when you're at the beginning of your career, you need guidance. You need to learn from people that have been there, have done that, have lived through it. So we're just trying to provide a platform for people to have access to good quality information. It doesn't have to be necessarily exclusively science-based. Like, we're open to every so often, like, reviewing a paper, and that's fun. We can review a paper, look what's applicable of it. But most importantly, we want to have people that bring their own experience so that we can all learn from it. Mostly learning from experience, keeping in the background a solid foundation of science.
I like that. I think that's great because, I mean, what we don't want to get real bogged down with, and I mean, myself personally, it's like, I don't want to sit there and comb through every research article. No. So it's great to kind of see other people's perspectives, people that maybe have done it before and can filter it down. I think at the end of the day, like the NSCA is trying to do with these SIG groups and what you're trying to do with yours and the weightlifting one, is to have it built off a foundation of science, but make sure that we can bridge the gap and make it applicable so that coaches can actually utilize it. Because it makes no sense to have just a bunch of research articles and kind of try to replicate the tests. The tests have already been done. The studies are done. Like, we're coaching athletes. We're not trying to coach subjects. We're not trying to replicate this research. We're trying to utilize it to make them better at their sport. So to have an open, honest conversation, use the platform to either mind dump things for people to conversate about and discuss and maybe sit on different sides of the fence and kind of actually have heated arguments with, is, I think, a great way to kind of do it. With the SIG, are there any actual researchers or professors that you see like kind of contribute to it? Because what I'm trying to get at is, how can researchers better understand what strength coaches want from the research? And then how can coaches better understand what a researcher actually needs to go through the whole process to publish an article or publish a study? Like, because I think the two of us really are unaware of what the other does, but both of them value what we do. Research is pointless without the coaches to actually carry about the process. And for coaches, if we're just coaching based off no science principles, it really, we're just kind of pointing and shooting with no aim. So how can the two of us like better understand each other and what we're doing so that we can be on the same page more often?
That's a great point. I think, well, first of all, I have to say I've been extremely lucky because since I've been involved with the weightlifting SIG, there's not a single researcher, and I could list many of them, starting from Paul Comfort, that has been hesitant in sharing their experience and expertise on the SIG. They're all very open. They participate. They contribute. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when we did, that was probably 2019, we did a roundtable in Washington, D.C., and we had people such as like Paul Comfort and Gregory Aff sitting at the same table, answering questions coming from the audience, anywhere from research to applied science. That was awesome. That was like the best exchange you can possibly want, because you had an audience that was mostly coaches, and you had a panel of speakers that were mostly researchers, and they were just going back and forth with questions and open discussions about things. And I think ultimately that should be the goal of any institutions that has research and coaching, because there is a degree of separation in what the two professions are and represent. Like a researcher, if he wants to be or she wants to be a good researcher, has to do research, has to spend time in the lab, getting the protocols done, statistics, everything that comes with it. A coach, if he or she wants to be a good coach, needs to spend time in the weight room. So they're two different professions. As long as there's a line of communication open and those two entities actually interact with each other, I think we're set to move forward and progress our field a lot. The moment we split them apart, it doesn't matter if a researcher has a background in strength and conditioning or a coach has an understanding of research. If there's no communication between the two, there's no growth. When I post things sometimes on the weightlifting SIG, like you said, things can get pretty heated, and like people start like arguing more or less politely about different topics. And I try to stay away from all that conversation because I'm there mostly to moderate and mediate. I don't want to put anything that is personal into the mix. The one thing I say is like, let's say I post something about my crypto teaching a power clean and coaching it as a jump with the bar. And everyone starts to like arguing, that's not the way you coach it, that's not the way you communicate it. Okay, it's cool. But even if you're learning what not to do, you're still learning something. Don't just jump and say, oh, that's not what we do. We don't want to get involved with that. That's not coaching weightlifting. There's a way that you can be much more polite about it and say, like, look, I disagree. I understand the queuing system that he's using. I'm understanding his strategy, but I don't fully agree. Well, I still learn how not to coach a clean. I still got better at my job. So there's always some positive to find in any confrontation, any experience, any conversation, as long as you enter that with an open mind. And I think in our profession, especially younger generations, are much more open-minded than we used to be 10 years ago. And that's going to facilitate the whole field. And I think we're going to grow out of it much stronger and much more competent in what we do. As long as there's communication, there's curiosity, asking questions, finding a way to answer questions, we're set to be pretty successful.
I like that. That's a great point. Like you can learn anything from any situation, even if if it reaffirms what you already kind of thought within your feeling. As long as you come into it with an open mind, you're willing to learn and listen to someone else's viewpoint. I think that definitely helps. And it might not change your point of view, but maybe it gives you a different cue. It gives you a different kind of thought process to how someone else does think about something. And like you said, with the researchers and all those professors and the coaching side, as long as there's an open line of communication, I think that's great. And I think it plays an even bigger role when there's someone like you on the academic side that has a very deep athletic and coaching background. I'd like to see like more researchers have that. And then on the other side, maybe some of our educational background for coaches like actually get a little bit more involved in the research side, because I know from my background, my undergrad and master's, we read research articles all the time. We learned how to kind of go about the process and write one. But outside of that, there wasn't much kind of going on. It was very informal how it was. So it'd be nice to kind of see a little bit more in-depth education on both sides of it, so that at least we can kind of see their other point of view for the future.
Absolutely.
Hey,
That's something that we're lucky to have at USC, because all the students that are going through their master program in sports science, which was recently approved as an ERP program by the NSCA, so is approved to like take the CSCS and everything else that comes with it. Our students, me included, when I went through the master, we get exposed to research. Like, doesn't matter what the outcome of our profession is going to be. We might be looking into like data analysis, sports science, strength and conditioning. It doesn't matter, but at least we get the exposure to whether that is like a small project or actually helping out with a study, but at least we get exposure to something that is formal research at academic level. And I think that's important, just as important as it is to have maybe an internship in a weight room with a sports team. But at least you saw both ends of the spectrum and you know what else is in between. You can kind of shape your own career based off that.
Exactly. No, that's a great point. And kind of shifting gears a little bit too, like we said, you do practice what you preach. You've got your hand in a lot of things right now, and currently powerlifting is one of the big one. I mean, you said yourself, you got some triathlons up your sleeve, you got a little bit of everything. But what kind of initially drew you into powerlifting? And honestly, more importantly, what shapes your reasoning for still wanting to challenge yourself and continue to train, even though you're probably super busy with all your research and everything else you got going on?
That's a very interesting question. And I hope I can give you a general overview of the way I see it. So I started when I stopped playing American football. I really enjoy the training aspect of it. Besides being on the field and playing the sport, I've always been extremely into lifting in general, and I love doing it. It was always performance oriented. So it was always like, oh, I need to squat more because I can play better, or I need to bench press more so that I can play better. Now that the playing aspect of that is gone, I was able to focus more on just experiencing the process of training as a power lifter at its fullness. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It just something happened at some point in my career. I can't pinpoint the moment, but like I realized that there was much more to it than just getting stronger. And I wanted to start experiencing at its fullness what is known as concurrent training. Like, okay, I'm already very strong. I can compete. I can probably qualify for a national championship relatively easily because of my background in strength training. Let me learn something new. Let me experiencing with something new. So I went through a period of time where, and there was a very much, so to speak, holistic process because it involved training, but also nutrition. I'm a certified sports nutritionist, so I follow some athletes with nutrition too, and I do nutrition for myself as well. So I went from eating 8 times a day, 7,000 calories with long 2.5 hours workouts. And most of my calories were for carbohydrates and protein. In 5 years, I tapered it down to intermittent fasting on ketogenic diet, training no longer than half hour, but 3 times a day, every day. That's my routine. Like as long as I have meetings or something else going on, I train 3 times a day, Monday to Saturday. And it's always like 4 to 5 times a week is some sort of strength training, which is primarily powerlifting and weightlifting combined. I kind of create my own system to it. But a lot of it is just some mobility. I'm getting very interested in kettlebell training now. So I'm getting through the Strong First certification path as well. And some endurance training, mostly because endurance training has always been my weakness. But the reason why I'm doing that is because I think if I can learn from my own experience what it means to train different aspects of athleticism, I can probably be better at coaching athletes that need to develop strength within the context of sport performance. Because, like as much as like we all like strength training, a football player needs a lot of strength, but not just strength. They also need some conditioning, injury prevention, and so far and so forth. And if you have experience with other athletes, the farther away you move from that strength end of the continuum, are you going to like track and field, sprinters, jumper, team sports, and why not? Strength is always going to be there. It's always going to be extremely important. It's always going to be in your background. It's the number one thing I look up with any athlete I work with. But then you will need to be able to implement other forms of training that can be cardiovascular training, speed training, power training, whatever the case may be. I've learned a lot on one end of the spectrum, which is just purely strength. Now I want to learn more of how the other end of the spectrum feels like when you also want to include some aerobic training into it. And I've done that as my own self as a subject. And I've done that going through nutrition, training, training philosophy, and all these kind of things. And I think I've learned mostly what not to do because I've done a lot of mistakes in my own program. But those very little things that I've learned that actually work have helped me tremendously to become a better coach, to the point that now some things I've learned from this very extreme approach, I am applying to some of my weightlifters as a general physical preparedness or power lifter, and I'm having excellent results. And the way I'm doing it now is completely different than the way I was doing it 10 years ago, just because I lacked the experience. Now I've had that practical, like living yourself experience, and I can relate to these things better. Like, for instance, now I train a little girl that does powerlifting. She's 54 kilos, and she did her first meet ever 3 weeks ago. She gold medal and she qualified for national, her first meet. She runs 4 times a week as a general physical preparedness, as a baseline level of fitness. And it hasn't interfered training, not even just a bit. So back in the days, I would have never been able to program that systemically in my routine because I didn't know how to do that. Now that I experience myself, I know how to have a handle of it. I can control it and I can use it to my own advantage.
I really like that. And being able to experience it yourself and then justify why you're putting in a program definitely helps. I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact that strength is like the number one foundation
Absolutely.
piece to like your training. So, but it's not the end all be all. And a lot of times, especially with powerlifting, like people want to just do strength work, but then you get to like look at some of the super heavyweights that are not at the top level.
Yep.
They're like right under the surface and they breathe heavy just going down to tie their shoes. Like all they're trying to do is build strength, build strength, build strength, but they're doing it very poorly. So I like what you talked about, having a holistic approach to it. And within your own training, you're basically just going to the whole other side of the fence, looking at a different spectrum so that you can kind of piece together what honestly works best for the athlete, not just what you think is best or what you're kind of biased to. So have with your own research, I know currently, because you're working a lot with weightlifting and then eccentric training as well. Have there been any, without giving any of the kind of your research and stuff away, have there been any big takeaways from your current research that you've been able to apply maybe with your own training?
I think, yes. One thing that is already kind of established in my line of research, and one thing that I'm about to start digging deeper into. So, what I've learned is that, or what it seems to be the case, like you said, strength is of paramount importance in pretty much any sport. Like, and I'm literally looking at the whole spectrum from pure endurance to pure strength. Strength, like just aerobic fitness for those who are more into endurance, are the foundation of any athletic development program. But with that being said, there's a difference in the way we train strength for an athlete compared to the way we train strength for a power lifter or weightlifter. They don't live just off their strength. They need to develop other qualities. So what I've learned, what I'm experiencing more and experimenting more with is that within the confine, and I want to make this clear, within the confine of strength training, which means everything that involves like heavy strength training, weightlifting, velocity-based training, everything that pertains to the domain of strength training. I think that when we're working with athletes, training at or training to maximize peak power output is crucial important. So whether we're lifting heavy weights or we're lifting light weights, we still want to match the appropriate speed for those lifts so that the amount of power we're generating is appropriate. I don't think there's any benefit in maximizing loads and get rid of the speed component of it, or extremely focusing on speed and neglect the load aspect of it. I think they should always go hand in hand. They should always be trained together. Of course, there are going to be times where maybe you push more on the weight and your velocity suffers a little bit. And there's going to be time where you push more on your velocity and your strength suffers a little bit. But combined together, as long as you can express the highest amount of power for the specific quality you're training, you're pretty set. And one thing that I have not done research yet on, but I'm experiencing with myself as a N1 kind of type of study, I think that there's the other side of the coin when you look at strength training, which is often neglected in the majority of sports, is mitochondrial health and being able to mitochondrial biogenesis, mitochondrial health, just being able to. So strength is a game of numbers. Like at some point you need to lift heavier and you need to lift more. You have to increase your volume. You have to increase your intensity. You can do that by adapting your CNS, your neuromuscular system, to create more force and lift more weight. That's out of question. However, for you to be able to increase your volume, your work capacity needs to increase for you to be able to tolerate the right intensity when you push heavy weights. Because we can all go through an hour and a half workout of just pure squatting, but how efficient our squats are going to be and how much adaptation we're actually creating. For that workout to be effective, you need to be able to be in a condition where your body can push every single set and every single rep at its limit. And for you to be able to do that, you need to be able to recover between sets and recover between reps. So you need to develop that aspect of your, so to speak, cardiovascular fitness, let's call it that way for now. But it comes down to a cellular level. Like, is your mitochondrial health? your mitochondria must be healthy enough to be able to regenerate energy while you rest between sets so you can tolerate more work. And if you can tolerate more work, your tonnage goes up, your volume load goes up, your adaptation gets better, you improve at what you do. And if you're a power lifter, guess what? You're going to end up being a stronger power lifter because over time you can do more volume. So those are two sides of, so training at peak power, whatever that peak power means for that specific training, and being able to tolerate that peak power over a longer period of time for longer, more intense workouts. I think that's the ultimate goal pretty much of any athlete, with variations, of course, that are sport specific, so to speak, but that should be the ultimate goal of strength training applied to performance.
I really like that, like developing the work capacity, because I think that funnels into, I know a lot of people right now are really harping on recovery of, and for all athletes in general. But I think if you develop a very good ability to tolerate a load, ability to tolerate a session, and build up a work capacity, that already filters into your recovery process.
Absolutely.
So I think those definitely go hand in hand for sure. That's definitely a great point. Hey, so we have a lot of, like, you've got a lot of stuff going on. Luckily enough, everything kind of filters into each other. Your training helps your research helps your coaching like helps anything in general. So how are you able to like juggle all these things and like prioritize it? Because obviously, like, you've got a lot going on. Like, there's life outside of sports performance as well. So what kind of like makes you focus on one thing at a time, or how are you able to kind of like put something else on the back burner? Because I know personally, like, I've got a coach, so yeah, I definitely want to train and I definitely want to compete, but sometimes and most of the time that's got to be the secondary thing. So how do you kind of prioritize all those things to still get everything done you want to?
Like 5 minutes before we started this podcast, I was just about to make myself another coffee, and my wife stopped and said, "You can't have any more coffee. No more coffee for today." I run on a lot of caffeine and I have very long days. Like, usually my day starts at, like, on a normal day, 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes more on the 4:30 side of the clock. And then it ends at 11 o'clock at night. So they're long days, and I can't lie about that. Like, the more you do, the more you need time to make those things happen. I am lucky enough that, like, I can train at home. We have a little garage gym. It's nothing crazy, but enough to, my wife is a competitive weightlifter. She lifted on Team USA. So she's 100 times better than I am at lifting. But she needs to train at home more consistently when she needs to. She's also a physical therapist, so she has a busy schedule as well. So I can do my training mostly at home, whether that is kettlebell, powerlifting, or weightlifting. When I run and bike, I just run and bike where we live. So that's pretty easy. That gives me a lot of flexibility. I usually do my riding early in the morning, and then the remaining of the day is for just meeting and training. But what it comes out to be is just, I think the ultimate answer is making sure you prioritize things. If you make training your priority, you find a way to make it happen, whether that means waking up early or sneaking in like a workout session in your lunch break. You can still make it happen. I'm extremely biased just because I absolutely dearly passionately love everything I do. Like, I don't mind reading. I don't mind writing. I love exercising. I love teaching. So for me, it feels like never being at work. So that gives me an extra drive to do things, which I'm fortunate to be there now. I haven't been always this lucky. Like, I've been through periods where, like, you know, that, like, when you're a young coach, you might be coaching a little, but you might have a side job or other things to do that are not truly what you're passionate about. And those days usually are grim and heavy, and like, you don't want to go through it. But then as you shave away things that you don't need anymore, and you just make a conscious choice of focusing your life and your energy on one goal that you believe in, I think things just fall into place. As long as you're passionate about what you do, of course you have to make sacrifices, that you can make everything fit, but the majority of it will happen. And I'm a big family oriented person. So for me, time with family is like number one priority. So when my wife is done at work, by the time she comes home to the time we go to bed, I have no commitment but being with her and our dog and our cats and whatever the case may be. But there are times where, like, she falls asleep at like 9 o'clock, And then when she falls asleep, I go back to the living room and go back writing, go back grading, go back doing something else until like 12 o'clock at night. It's my choice. I ran this way so far, but I think as long as you're passionate about what you do, you make it happen.
I love that. Yeah, being passionate about it definitely helps, and being able to shave away some of those extracurricular things once you're able to do it. I mean, young coaches, you're doing free internships, you're commuting, whatever it is, like researchers, like sometimes you're on the third shift. So whatever it is, you're there at night when no one's around, but having some good time management skills, being able to prioritize what's really important to you, you'll make the time for it. So it's cool to see someone that's really passionate about a lot of things still be able to find time to do all of those, and then really get rid of the ones that kind of drain you and are things that you don't find any meaning for. So that's awesome to kind of hear how your schedule lines up.
And you said a very important thing that I think is like 100% crucial. Like what makes you feel good, what makes you happy, what's good for you. It takes an extra degree of dedication to actually find out what makes you feel better, and what you think it makes you feel better by the end is completely worthless. Once you become very clear and objective in the way you look at things, and you see what's good for you, you see what's bad for you, kind of everything falls into place. Like, of course, like I would love to like, I don't know, like go watch games more often because I'm very passionate about live sports, or like go racing karts sometimes like in my free time. It's fun, but whether I do that or not, it doesn't affect the quality of my life. So I can shut it off. But I rather focus on something that, like, for me, skipping a workout, it ruins my day. If I don't train, like I don't have the same level of energy for the whole day. So that's really good for me and I need it. Sticking to a diet, that's really good for me and I need it. Reading a book that is not science oriented, that's very good for me and I need to do it on a daily basis. Those are few healthy habits that you just build in your life. And you just keep going on with those, and they feed you energy constantly. You can use that energy to do like work oriented things that are also very, very important because we all have to make a living at some point.
Yeah, unfortunately. Hey, but I like that though, like having clear objectives, and that definitely keeps you grounded. And if the majority of those things are what keep you centered on what your target goal is, and they feed back into you and energize you, like more so than coffee sometimes, then those are definitely good things to kind of keep and keep habitually doing all the time. So awesome to kind of see how like your goals align and how all the things that you do on a daily basis drive into the next one. And it's a reason I think you can balance all those things that you're doing right now.
For sure.
So like any good training session, I know you're involved in a lot of them. We end the show with a good finisher. So we've got 4 quarters, 4 questions, and overtime for you today. So you could take as long as you want, or you can shoot them off back to me rapid fire. But you ready?
Yeah, ready.
All right. So first one for you: biggest influence in the strength conditioning field as a whole, either sports science, research, or who's the go-to person you're following right now?
My personal one, 100% Dr. Yuri Verchosansky. Like when you said that I can talk a little bit more about it, right?
Oh yeah, go for it.
So when I signed up for college, I started as a biology major, but I always had an interest in sports science. So my mom, now she's retired, but she used to be a French teacher. So she's been around books her whole life. So she had the genial idea of like taking me to a bookstore like the week before I started college and said like, just choose a book, whatever book you want. I'll buy it for you. And that's going to be your book to read when you start college. And for some random reason, my eye were caught on like a book by Yuri Verchosansky. It was a very cool. I knew nothing back then. I was 18. I knew nothing about sports science, but just the cover looked good. There was, I think, an eye jumper on the cover, so it looked very sportsy. It wasn't too big. I wasn't big into reading back then, so I said, okay, I'll buy this. And that was my very first reading in the field of sports science, and that has been the most meaningful, forceful, powerful impact on my entire career. To the point that nowadays, if I ever have a question, I'd rather go back to like some of his books or his daughter's books, Natalia Verchosansky, than looking elsewhere. Like as being a non-present mentor for my whole career, and I always go back to his books.
Awesome. What about in powerlifting? Is there anyone that, like, since that's your kind of where you're focusing your training right now, is there anyone in either powerlifting or weightlifting that you really look up to?
Powerlifting, Louis Simmons for sure. I got certified with the Westside Barbell. I love their method. Would I follow it the way it is? Probably not. But I like the way Louis Simmons himself started from a background in science and then develop his own approach, of course, taken to a far extreme. I'm not saying that is not the case, but he kept it somehow grounded and like solid within some sort of scientific evidence. In weightlifting, one of my most influential personality was definitely Coach Takano. I did my internship with him, and he taught me a whole lot. I think he's one of the best experts in the field. Again, I'm not a professional in weightlifting, so I don't have much to say about it, but I listened to him a lot.
I like it. Hey, so we touched on it a little bit before, but what are some of your hobbies outside of training and all the research and everything else you got going on? If it's not strength conditioning related, what's kind of your go-to, like with your family time and everything?
Family time is just spending time with our dog. As right now, we are both very outgoing people. We like to be outside, so go for walks on the beach. That's our family time. But when it comes to my personal hobby, 100% motor racing. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch F1. I have my own little Scuderia Ferrari fan club based in Long Beach. So we watch races together. I have a little 1991 Mazda Miata that sometimes I take racing. I don't have a lot of time for it. Maybe it happens like twice a year or 3 times a year. But when I can, I either working on my car or watching races or something like that.
Nice. I'll have to look into those a little bit more.
Absolutely. Anytime you want.
Hey, so if you weren't in this position you're now, like, I know after maybe your PhD, like you defend it and everything, if you were in a different career, completely separate from strength conditioning, what do you think you would be doing? And if you weren't doing powerlifting right now, where do you think you would be focusing your training on?
Completely different field?
Yes.
Oh, I think career-wise, I would probably be a mechanical engineer because that was my passion growing up. And then I switched, like my last year of high school, I decided that I want to be more into, because I got very passionate about training. So probably I would be a mechanical engineer of some sort, maybe working in F1, who knows. In terms of training, oh, man, I don't know. I would probably be the opposite of what I am now. So like a purely endurance-based kind of athlete, like a good triathlete or like a swimmer or something. Completely the opposite. Because when I first started training, when it was like not structured and it was just me getting fit to play football, I really enjoyed the running aspect of it. I used to run like hours on the river when I used to live, and that was my kind of like my own way of disconnecting from school and preparing for training. So if I hadn't got into more of the weight room aspect of it, I probably would have kept doing that kind of training. So probably a triathlete, an Ironman maybe.
Definitely going all the way from the opposite spectrum.
Yeah.
That's cool. Hey, so if you set up an ideal training day for yourself, maybe it's powerlifting or whatever you got going on for the day, what's your go-to training music? And what's your post-training meal look like?
Whoa, I don't listen to music. I listen to audiobooks when I train. I love books way too much, and I don't have time to read them. So usually I play books when I train. I just take my earplugs off when I do a set and then put it back on. I don't really need music to go through my workout. Besides running, when I run, I always have musics. In that case, I'm very old school. I listen to Red Hot Chili Peppers a lot. Usually every album, like I just go through the whole album when I'm training. And my post-workout meal, now that I'm on ketosis, is probably going to be a scoop of nuts, some MCT oil, and maybe a protein shake. But back then, when it used to be the good old days of like lifting heavy and just do that, my post-workout meal was like sometimes like pizza with a lot of meat on it. So I went from one extreme to the other.
That's hilarious. Yeah. on the keto, your keto diet is definitely a different training meal for sure.
For sure.
Hey, so the last one I got for you for overtime. What's the most valuable piece of advice you've received? And if you want to share, from who?
Yes. I received that from my mentor at the NSCA, which is Dr. Jay Doves. Uh, it's funny, like we started working together before I even got involved with the NSCA, and he helped me to do my dissertation for my undergrad in Italy, so a long time ago. And he once, especially when I start going more into academics, he once told me like, it doesn't really matter, and that applies to everyone, not just researchers. It doesn't really matter how many articles you published, how many research you published. If you're a coach, it doesn't really matter if you're coaching a D1 level or a D3 level, or if you're even a personal trainer, whatever that is. Uh, as long as you can impact people's life with your passion and what you're passionate about, you're doing a great job. So that's what I love about teaching and mentoring myself, other young students. I don't care if they're going to end up being PhDs, they're going to be end up coaching or doing something else in life. As long as I taught them something that they can carry with them for the rest of their life, and it's going to be there to help them solve problems or go through hard times or whatever the case may be, I think I've done my own job. I like to do that either teaching them values through training, like values that you learn being in the weight room and pushing hard, or values that you learn setting the bar higher in academics. But it's focusing on the journey and what you learn with it more than the result, because you can learn a terrific amount of skills just by being an athlete the athlete, and then use those skills in a completely different setting later on in life, or your personal career or your private life. It's just teaching them something that it can impact their life and make them better people in the long run.
I love that. That's you're definitely a coach at heart, because impacting people is the number one thing for sure. Being a mentor, being someone that has high character, high values, that's awesome. And I know I've heard a lot of people say it before, like the weight room is just a laboratory for life. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, academics, sports science as well, anytime you're able to like use those things, and even if someone doesn't follow the exact career path that you're looking towards, like you can take those character traits, those values, time management, all those skills you kind of build and apply it to whatever you were going to do. And that's what, like with my college athletes, majority aren't going to go pro. So the more I'm able to kind of impact them and whatever career they end up doing, if they be great family members, brothers, sisters, like parents, whatever it ends up being, like that's the whole point of training, really. That's
Absolutely.
awesome. Hey, so how can people kind of get a hold of you and follow your journey? You've got, like I said, you've got a lot going on. Your book, Power, the Training of Champions. I know there's a lot of places you can pick that up. You've got articles on EliteFTS and a lot of other places as well. Where can people kind of get a hold of you, read some of your research, and buy your book and everything?
I tend to post the majority. I'm pretty bad with everything that involves computers and social media. But I try to keep up with at least Instagram. So they can, I think it's Antonio underscore Squillante CSCS is the same since I opened the account. 99% of the picture on my Instagram is either my dog or my wife, but it's my profile. So don't freak out if you don't see any of my pictures. They're just much cuter than I am. So I think that they deserve to be there more than I do. But I try to share at least links or short abstracts or little snapshot of what I do on my Instagram page. I'm trying to get a little bit more into Twitter. I'm not that good yet, but yeah, definitely Instagram. And if anyone has any question or they want to reach out to me, I'm always available. My email is Squillan, which is the beginning of my last name. So SQUILLAN at usc.edu. That's my personal email. You can email me anytime you want. Anyone can reach out to me. I'm always available for a phone call, a quick chat on email. I try to be available when people want to talk about all things training or science or research or whatever.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put all the links up there. All your social media stuff, as well as like where to kind of get the book and some of your articles going on. But it's been awesome to chat. I can't thank you enough for coming on and I'll definitely have to make a trip down to USC sometime. Maybe see you in a race car going at it. But I can't thank you enough for coming on today, Antonio.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It was great.
Of course, man. Take care.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.